Good morning, everyone. I trust that you are well. Uh, as you can see, we're in the Beis Medrash, or we're in the study room of the Beis Medrash. It's quiet for the moment, so we're able to join you. Good morning, Peter, David, Clarice, Andrea, and all those that are still joining us. So I want to share a brief idea. It's Wednesday, so it's the one day I try to sit in the Beis Medrash, so I'm not going to be able to stay too long, and also this room is going to be occupied shortly, and I'll be evicted. But one of the Mishnayos that is perhaps most pertinent to this week's parsha, which is Parshas Korach, is the Mishnah that says it just asks about what is an argument for the sake of heaven. Now, of course, whenever we're involved in an argument, we all think it's for the sake of heaven. We're always right, so we're always for the sake of heaven. But it says an argument that is for the sake of heaven is the argument between Hillel and Shammai. And an argument that is not for the sake of heaven is that of Korach and his followers. The argument of Hillel and Shammai will endure. The argument of Korach and his followers will not endure. So there are two things to understand. Firstly, Hillel and Shammai. Why is it that their argument is for the sake of heavens and that it will endure? We'll deal with that another time. But I just want to touch for a couple of minutes on the point of Korach and his followers and why it is that it is considered an argument which will not endure and that it is not for the sake of heaven. Let's try and understand briefly. Korach came along, one of the great minds and great people of the Jewish people before this rebellion, and he challenges his cousin Moshe. And he says seems to make a very admirable, lofty accusation and challenge to Moshe. What does he say? Kulam kadoshim, all of us are holy. Moshe, listen, you've taken the leadership for yourself, you and your brother Aaron. But let's be clear. We just had the giving of the Torah. And the giving of the Torah, all the Jewish people heard the word of God. God spoke to all of the Jewish people, divine revelation. So why is it only you should be holy? Why should only you and Aaron take the leadership for yourselves, have a monopoly over the leadership? We all should have. We're all equally holy. Now, let's try and understand, because very often we find ourselves dealing with these type of arguments. What exactly was Korach saying? Korach was saying, according to Rabbi J.B. Soloveitchik, that this was a common sense rebellion. There's a wonderful essay, you should read it, guys. The common sense rebellion. And basically, the argument was, he came along and he made two claims to Moshe, which tried to ridicule and to show that, in fact, it was ridiculous that Moshe could claim exclusivity in terms of leadership, that we should have a hierarchical structure with Moshe at the top of the tree. I said to Moshe as follows: if you have a Beis Medrash like the one I've got behind me, and it's full of books. Now, those books, many of them will contain the parsha, the portion relating to the Shema, which has in it the command of mezuzah. Said to Moshe, if I've got all these books like the ones behind me, and they've got the parsha of mezuzah inside them, do I still need to place a mezuzah on the door? It's ridiculous. The whole point of the portion of mezuzah on the door is to remind us of the mitzvah of mezuzah. But if I've got it all, I'm surrounded by it on all sides, like the room that I'm in, why would I need to also place a mezuzah on the door? It seems redundant. And Moshe responded, even though you may have hundreds, if not thousands of books in your library that have the portion of the Shema with the mention of mezuzah, you still have to place a mezuzah on your door. And they all started laughing, ridiculing Moshe, because it seems nonsensical. Then the next argument that he came, they were wearing garments, blue garments, Korach and his followers, and it had the it had blue garments because it had the blue threads running through it. And we know that in the days gone by, there used to be an obligation before it became extinct, to have a blue thread on the tzitzit themselves, one blue thread. So Korach said, in the same logical vein, if it is that if there's an obligation to have one thread on the tzitzit, on the corner of the garments, to remind us of the mitzvot, then if I have thousands of threads which are blue running through it, surely I wouldn't also need an additional thread on the corner of the garment on the tzitzit. And Moshe says, no, you still need it. And they started laughing hysterically, ridiculing Moshe, that it made no sense. Who was right? Who was right, Michael? Well, in terms of pure logic, it made sense. It made sense what Korach was saying. If the whole purpose, and the emphasis on the word whole, if the whole purpose of doing mitzvot is the rationale that is contained within them, if the whole purpose of doing things in life is because of the logic, then where that logic falls away, then there is no point in carrying out any type of action. It's a futile exercise. What's the point? Yeah. So if I have, a room full of Sifrei Torah, which has the power or book, Jewish books, and it has the parsha of the Shema, and the whole idea of placing the Shema on the door is that it mentions the mezuzah, mentions the obligation. Why would I need to do it? I've got it all around me. And that's the logic. Now, the truth be told, do we do things because of logic, or do we do things because at the end of the day, it's a statute, there's a command. And the truth is that we do it for both. On the one hand, we are meant to follow the commands, the responsibilities, the obligations. We do things in life because it is our duty, because it is our responsibility. Sometimes we understand it. Very often we don't. But if I do something because that's my duty, because I'm a loyal servant, then that's what I'm meant to do. Consider the following. Her Majesty, she should be gesund, she should live to 120, be well. So Her Majesty, now she will give a series of commands throughout her day, throughout her week. Now, on some occasions, when she gives those instructions, they are absolutely crystal clear to all around her. They understand it. What do I mean they understand? They understand what she is saying, and they understand why she is saying it. But even if there are occasions where they don't understand the why, it doesn't make sense to them, nonetheless, loyal subjects follow out the command to the letter of the law, whether they understand it or not. And to do so when it only makes sense means it is self-serving. You're not actually adhering and upholding the instructions because you've been told to do them, but rather because you feel self-motivated to do it because it makes sense to you. That's not following commands. You can't have an army that decides, that we're following commands because it makes sense to us. When it doesn't make sense to us, then we're going to question. That's not the way it works. In fact, you may remember I think it was 1982, Israel had a war in the Golan. Anyone remember this? It was a famous, I think it was in the Golan. Anyways, the Israeli army, it's one of its own. It really is, out there, completely different to any other army. And they managed to counterattack in the north of Israel, and they pushed back. And they got an instruction. I think it was Ariel Sharon was involved, and they got an instruction. Okay, you pushed back. We've repelled the enemy. Now stop. Do you think they listened? Of course not. They said to themselves, let's keep going. We want to teach them, the enemy, a lesson. And they pushed on and on and on, further and further north. They wanted to get to Damascus. In the end, they had to call out the big guns to stop the troops from going further. Now, for them, it made absolute sense. But they were still wrong. Even though it made logical sense for them at that particular moment in time, from their vantage point, at the end of the day, They weren't following the chain of command. So sometimes we understand things, sometimes we don't. We have to understand that our job is to follow the commands. And when we understand it, it's an added bonus. We try to understand things the best we can. But if we can't, we can't. A parent doesn't always have to explain to their child why they need to do something. The child has to follow the instructions of the parent, whether it makes sense or not. I know teenagers press all the wrong buttons and they challenge us, and if they don't understand, then they don't want to do things. But that's the point. That's the point of life. It's not self-serving. It's about really is about us making sure that we do things because we are loyal subjects and citizens. There's an amazing story. With this will end. We've said this story before, but it's worth reminding ourselves of it. We said it in a different context, and that was that Kivi. He was a phenomenal speaker, and Microsoft found out. They found out that he was this great speaker, and they wanted him to open up their conference. The only problem was they asked Kivi to open it up on the Saturday. They always started their conferences on the Saturday, and Kivi had become recently a religious Jew, a Baal Teshuvah, or he'd become more committed, and he'd taken on the Sabbath on the Shabbat. He wasn't going to drive. He wasn't going to break the Shabbat. So he refused the offer from Microsoft. I mean, this was a once in a lifetime opportunity. Long story short, they offered him double the money. He refused. They offered him treble the money. He refused. He explained to them, I've got my principles. I've taken on this thing called the Shabbat. You're not going to move it. Anyways, they went back to the chief execs of Microsoft, and eventually it was unprecedented. They changed the day of the conference. They had to start, instead of on a Saturday, they started on a Sunday. Why? Because of one little Jew that was so important to them. They needed to start the conference on the Sunday. Anyways, they found it ridiculous and completely irrational and illogical. Why would anybody give up 3 times the amount of money? After all, this was a business. He's meant to be a businessman. So they were on a private jet with Bill Gates a few weeks later, and they were discussing and sharing with him, the story. And it was amusing to them. They found it ridiculous and even, laughable that somebody had given up all this money, just for the sake of keeping the Sabbath. And Bill Gates turned around to his chief executives and he said, sometimes there are some things in life, like principles, which are worth even more than all the money in the world. And that is the lesson for us for today, to bear in mind that it's not always logic that makes sense. Please God, we should be able to have the strength of character and the fortitude to be able to move forwards in our lives and be able to learn the lessons from Korach. Wishing everyone well. Have a great day. We'll see you very soon. Tomorrow, 10